You is my favorite ongoing Netflix original. If I had to rate season 1, I'd give it an 8.7, season 2, a 9.5, and season 3, a 7.4. It's got a sharp writing, a likable main character, and very strong antagonist. But nothing's perfect. So today, I'm going to complain about it. And I will be spoiling everything. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. I will mainly be nitpicking for seasons 1 and 2, then discussing a lot of issues I have with season 3, and the majority of the video will be on season 3. Starting with part 1, my only real problem with season 1 is that Beck sucks. And to me, it's kind of like Breaking Bad. People like Walt, even though he does evil stuff, because he's smart, interesting, and entertaining. People hate Skylar because she's not likable, interesting, or entertaining. At least not most of the time.
Shut up!
Skylar,
shut up!
please
shut up!
stop.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
In a similar vein, even though Joe kills people, I can forgive that, because he's cool. I'm not willing to forgive Beck's admittedly smaller transgressions because I don't think she's cool. Plus, in season 1, Beck is the ultimate goal. She is the prize that Joe is fighting for, and if the prize for anything sucks, it cheapens the whole thing. And I do get that part of the point is that Joe goes for women that are a little strange, but it doesn't make Beck any less annoying to watch. So to illustrate my point, I'd like to spend the next part of the video exploring some of Beck's annoying behavior, starting with small stuff and working my way forward. Joe says that if your IQ is above a certain level, you're going to be miserable, and the number isn't even that high. Beck replies that she feels like she'd be happier if she was stupider. But Beck is sort of stupid and never does anything really smart in the series. The one thing you could say is sort of smart is when she convinces Joe that she still loves him in episode 10. However, I almost think that's more Joe being dumb than her being smart, and she botches multiple escape attempts. Her and Joe spend a lot of time together and are all girlfriend-boyfriend. Then Joe overhears a conversation between Beck and her friends where she refers to Joe as a maybe. And she talks about hooking up with some guy on Tinder. Joe blames himself for misreading the situation, and it is partially his fault for not trying to make things exclusively exclusive. But to me, her banging random dudes cheapens their connection, although as a person who is technically single, she is allowed to see who she wants. After that, Joe brings her to buy another bed, which she broke banging another dude while Joe stood outside and watched. Beck asks Joe if she's unremarkable. Joe replies, "Unremarkable people don't worry about being unremarkable," which is nonsense. Sometimes people worry about stuff and they are right to worry about it. I beat myself up all the time about being bad at time management, and I'm still terrible at it. My self-hatred aside, later on, we get Beck's inner monologue, which I think is supposed to help me relate to her, but I don't. There's nothing here that shows me a different side to her. She also completely lied to Joe about her dad being dead. The fact that she lies to everyone about it doesn't make it much better for me. It just means that she lied to more people, and personal trauma is not an excuse to be dishonest. But the two of them talk through this lie and end up making up. Joe apologizes to her, and even Beck is confused by this. Even though it's one of Joe's character flaws, it makes me dislike Beck more because Joe lifts the accountability from her and places it on himself instead. Then when Beck and her dad's new family get into it at dinner and Joe tries to comfort her, Beck goes off on him and tells him to leave, immediately throwing their previous heart-to-heart and newfound intimacy out the window. She apologizes to him later, but doesn't improve in a long-term consistent way. And as you heard and will hear, this is a recurring thing for Beck. During the apology, she even admits that she just says stuff when she's mad. And not that I know anything about dating, but if your partner says mean stuff just to win an argument, that's a bad partner. Peach breaks into Joe's apartment to look for her stolen laptop, which, to be fair, Joe did steal. And Beck, who is his girlfriend and does not know Joe stole it, does not defend him. It's one thing to have a friend who won't defend you when you're not around. It's another to have a girlfriend who won't defend you when you are in the room and one of her friends has broken into your place. I know some people may dismiss this because, like I said, Joe did actually steal the laptop. So if you want to mentally edit this point out, I don't blame you. After that, Peach sets Beck up to get rejected by a literary agent. Joe overhears this and tells Beck the exact truth, word for word, and Beck goes off on him again.
You are an asshole. You know, if you don't believe in me, just say so. Don't come up with some bullshit conspiracy theory.
Joe gets her a job and she's a terrible employee, not even showing up for work on time. And when Joe confronts her on this, she flips it on him.
But you did say the hours were flexible and that I'd have time to write.
I did, but you haven't been writing.
After Beck finds out that Candace cheating on Joe destroyed him, she continues to lie about the fact that she also cheated on Joe. And just a reminder, when he originally asked her about it, she lied to his face. The word gaslighting is very overused and oftentimes is not even appropriate, but in my opinion, is exactly right here.
You've been different, Beck.
You're being crazy.
She tells the truth eventually and says she cheated on Joe because she loved him too much. And Joe buys it because he's a love junkie. That's it for Beck. And now that we've discussed my main issue, let's talk about minor ones. When Benji is talking with Beck, he says, "It looks good on you, babe," the extra weight. And when Peach and Beck are arguing later in the season, she brings up 9/11.
And you sent me there.
I had no idea that he was using it again. I mean, he's been clean since 9/11. Beck, when it happened, he was in an airport.
I don't give a shit. You threw me under the bus.
The show normally does a good job of balancing humor and drama, but Benji doesn't even feel like a real person when he makes the weight comment, and Peach bringing up 9/11 in the way she does really undercuts the drama of the scene. In the, I don't know what else to call it, sad poem reading scene, Becca reads her poem to an audience. However, the professor just read the first part of it out loud a few scenes ago, so we're listening to the same content again. I would label this a minor issue, but I'm bringing it up because I think it would be cool if the professor read it silently, talked about how good and inspired it was, then Beck reads it out loud, and we, the audience, see that it's garbage. It would really drive home the tragic fact that the esteemed teacher just wants to sleep with her. Joe says Benji is the poster child for white male privilege after he already brought that up in episode 1. So him saying it again feels forced. I originally thought that Joe saying feministy things while stalking women was the show being ironic, but season 2 ups the ante, mentioning things like white male fragility and white male privilege a lot more. However, here I thought it might be making fun of LA culture and maybe how often people talk about that stuff there, especially since the show doesn't seem to like LA and especially seems to poke fun at militant feminism in season 1.
Personally, I'm of the opinion that all penetration under patriarchy is rape, and so before
Oh,
I
Blythe,
would even
Beck,
go
Blythe.
there-
If you're someone who likes that stuff in the show and doesn't understand what my deal is, think about it this way. Imagine a piece of exposition is given almost every episode. We've already heard it, but characters just keep saying it to the point where you're like, yeah, I get it. That's how I feel about this. You can believe in whatever you want, but in fiction, I don't like repetition. And I do view this as a much more noticeable form of the problem with the sad poem rather than being a political issue. Continuing with my nitpicking, Joe watches the footage on Benji's phone where a guy dies and mentions that there's homophobia in the video. But there's nothing homophobic in the section that he played, so it comes off a little weird. I assume they didn't want to say anything racy on Netflix, but I don't think the world would end if a character shown to be a douchebag called another douchebag a gaywad or something like that. Moving on, Peach is a great villain. The problem is she's too great, and honestly, she's so annoying, it makes me not want to rewatch season 1 ever again. As opposed to season 2, where I actually like Love's Friends. Karen Minty teleported into the show the exact episode she was needed, and she not only lives in the same building, but right by Joe, so I don't understand why she wasn't introduced ahead of time. It's another minor issue, but it just feels unrealistic that she didn't appear before. In episode 10, Joe falls into the television trope of being really bad at explaining himself at a very important time. He simply blurts out that killing Peach was done in self-defense, but I think if he had told Beck that she pulled a gun on him, it would have gone over at least a little better, and even if it hadn't, I would feel like Joe explained himself to the best of his ability, like he normally does, and been more satisfied with the scene. That being said, I do understand that Joe is in a slightly stressful situation, so it's not a big deal. Next thing, the very last scene of the season with Joe encountering Candace feels a bit off. Like when you listen to a song on YouTube and it's sped up by 5% to avoid copyright.
Candace. Here.
Alive. Yeah. So, I think we have some unfinished business to talk about.
In fact, I would go as far as to say that scene and a few other scenes with Candace feel like they're out of a different show. A worse show.
Murder has a way of following you. You know, they say you never know if you're fight or flight until you're forced to find out. Turns out, I'm fight.
I don't know if it's the actress or the lines or what, but I don't buy Candace as an antagonist. She works well as a vulnerable former victim of Joe, but when she tries to be a stone cold, I'm gonna get you type villain, it falls flat for me. And maybe it's meant to show that being a villain isn't who Candace really is. But it's still not fun to watch. I'm not sure what the internet's opinion is on S1 versus S2, but I like season 2 better because I like pretty much all the characters better. Nothing against Love or Henderson or anyone else, but with all his little idiosyncrasies and contradictions, 40 feels like a real person and is probably one of the best written characters I've ever seen.
40 has ruined their marriage. I've seen 40 the addict, 40 the braggart, the crybaby, the manipulator. But I've never seen this side.
That being said, I do feel like the writing overall has taken a small step back from season 1. And I definitely don't think little kids talk like this.
You are home.
Sure, we're home.
No, I mean, my home is you.
And I feel like some of Joe's narration is trying too hard to be quirky.
The robots are not our friends.
It may have been that way in season 1, and I just didn't notice it until season 2, but I don't remember anything like that. This one is completely personal and a minor issue. But Joe gets on a dating app after him and Love break up, and it's revealed that Joe doesn't know what cuffing season is. You're telling me Joe stalked Beck and all her basic friends on social media, and he never heard that phrase? Plus, he worked with the general public at the bookstore, and we love stupid phrases. I'm quite possibly the exact opposite of hip, and I hear those words every year right before cuffing season. Finally, this isn't necessarily a writing issue, but I don't like how quickly it's confirmed that Beck is dead or probably dead. I think it'd be better if Joe and the audience, through Joe, go back and forth on whether she's actually there or not, and it being confirmed one way or the other could be a semi-big moment. That's all I have for season 1 and 2. You, the third, is insanely hit or miss. I know this video is titled The Problems with You, but it's impossible to discuss season 3 in a purely positive or purely negative way, so I will be going back and forth. First off, Love is a caricature of herself, mainly in the first 5 episodes, but a little bit after that as well. Joe tells her that he went over to Natalie's house, but Natalie implies that her and Joe have never hung out because she doesn't know that Love knows. So, with no proof that Joe has cheated, she assumes he must have cheated and melees Natalie in the head. And it's shot like an over-the-top horror movie. Then it's shot in the same way when she melees the anti-vaxxer. I know Joe did actually cheat and then got cold feet, but Love hitting Natalie in the head as a first resort rather than talking to her or talking to her husband, Joe, seems unlike her based off what we've seen so far. If Love from season 2 was Love from season 3, Joe would have smelled the crazy from a mile away, as would the audience, and there's no way she would have been able to hold down a job at an Avron acting like that, even if her parents owned it. Plus, she would have probably ended up killing or hurting some people in the past who got too close to James. But even when she comes clean about that, she never brings up hurting anyone else over him. If that weren't enough, some of her lines and line delivery isn't great.
Why wouldn't you talk to me?
We talk.
Something's going on. You're always distracted.
Oh, we have a body to take care of. If this is a partnership, I'm better off alone.
Love? Why don't you love me anymore?
One can make the argument that Love is acting differently because she's stressed from the baby and her and Joe's tumultuous relationship. In season 3, Love is the real Love. Season 2 was the Love she was pretending to be to romance Joe. But that doesn't explain the delivery or the B horror movie camera angles. On the other hand, Joe's narration has tightened up a bit from season 2, so that's good. Moving past those first 5, later in the season, Love randomly shouts that she killed Natalie while Sherry and Carrie are upstairs, creating a disastrous situation for her and Joe. I really can't stress this enough. Love went from a likable person with crazy eyes to a complete dumb idiot dummy who is more a liability than an asset. But in a narrative sense, I do like the scenario she accidentally created where it's unclear if Sharecare heard them or not. However, it's quickly ruined by the fact that Love says Sherry has a tell. When she's lying, she scratches her arm. Then they go upstairs, and Sherry almost immediately scratches her arm. It's like the audience was given a cheat code to read the scene because the writers thought it would be bad if we were in suspense. I mean, what a great opportunity to draw out the tension throughout the night and sway the audience back and forth. Do they know? Don't they? And the writers completely squandered it. Love's mom burning down the vineyard was shot in such a way that I thought it was a fantasy. But no, she really did that, and the scene does happen that abruptly. There could have been scenes with her trying to convince any number of Quinn henchmen to do the deed. The event is discussed in vague terms, but they say no because it's too risky, and we, the audience, aren't sure what's going on. Then she gets sloshed and does it herself. It should also be mentioned that the show takes the time to tell us about her and her husband's divorce proceedings. It'd be better if we saw at least some of it, perhaps through the eyes of Joe and Love. And it'd be funny and kind of fitting if Love's mom found out that Joe killed people and was like, okay, do you want me to clap? If you want an example of what I'm talking about, I won't spoil the exact situation, but think season 1 of Mad Men. Moving on, I complained that there were some lines in season 1 that undermine serious scenes, and in this season, 90% of Sherry and Carrie's dialogue is that. Even when they are in a cage, and it seemed like having a heartfelt moment, they can't help but act like memes.
Don't forget 6% body fat.
Your dentist.
Warner Brothers was apparently involved in the making of this season, and I can tell because episode 1 has like 19,000 cuts, which are especially noticeable when they don't need to be there, and when they did the same thing, but worse, to The Little Things on HBO Max. This isn't a video about Little Things, but they butchered that movie, and me and my children will never forgive them. Rami Malek and Denzel Washington are too good for all those shenanigans. Joe's kid is named, I believe, Henry 40 Quinn or something like that, and Joe accidentally thinks of him as 40 and not Henry, then corrects himself twice just in the opening few minutes, so it feels repetitive. He also does it while actually talking to Henry at the end of episode 1 because twice wasn't enough. I get that they are trying to make a point about 40 being on Joe's mind, but it's too much. Once in thought and once in dialogue would have been fine. Joe also has narration about Love being a monster and murdering people with her bare hands, as if Joe hasn't done the same. To be fair, they do address it and sort of make up later, but it's a Beck-style makeup where everything is fine, then immediately not fine again. Moving on, I don't have a problem with two adults being in a consensual relationship But the people around Love constantly bringing up that Theo is a teenager makes it feel creepy. And also, Theo is annoying and can't keep it in his pants for 10 seconds. I understand he's a teenager, but there are tons of teenagers in teenager movies who do not act this teenagery. And if there is a possible way to misread a situation, Theo misreads it. He sees Joe loading Natalie into a vehicle and narrates how he's feeling out loud to himself every 5 seconds, when you can tell he's horrified just from his expression. So the comments feel artificially placed in and unneeded. While we're on dialogue, Love has a line at the end of episode 1 about going to couples therapy after she kills a woman, and it belongs in a different show. Maybe her and Candace can get a spinoff where it's Squid Games, but just the two of them delivering weird lines until one of them dies. Joe and Love decide to build a cage together after couples therapy, like it's a joint Facebook account. And while Joe is saying how much they trust each other, it shows them both hiding keys in the cage so they can get out if the other locks them in. And rather than just have the narration and visuals not match, like True Detective, Joe feels the need to call attention to it. I'll admit, this and the complaint about Theo's narration are very minor complaints, so I'll balance it out with a very minor compliment. I like when Joe and Love are talking about having a three-way with Sherry and Carrie and say out loud, we can just meet with them and talk. It's not like we're agreeing to anything. Then it cuts to Sherry slamming down a non-disclosure agreement on the table in front of them. It feels like these showrunners having some dumb fun, and I'm down for that when it doesn't undermine anything. It's bizarre that this is coming out at the same time as the Gabby Petito situation because they bring up missing white woman syndrome. The idea that white women are given more attention when going missing as opposed to minorities. With I think the reasoning being if, say, indigenous women got more attention, more of them would be found. However, this isn't supported by the narrative since Natalie's killer, Love Quinn, was not apprehended due to the attention the murder got on social media. Neither did the police catch Love, and neither did we get minority women going missing in the program to show the juxtaposition. I believe the cool kid game journos call that ludonarrative dissonance. Man, I kind of feel like a douchebag even semi-ironically saying that phrase. But back to you. The reference isn't pointless though, since this solidified for me that the show is very liberal and there's not much irony going on in that department, which is fine. And I don't care if you believe in the aforementioned syndrome or not, the narrative contradicting itself is more the issue. It makes the mention seem very performative, like a writer cared enough to have the characters discuss it, but not enough to actually make it a part of the show. I will say, though, that I'm glad there's less side quest in this installment. Season 1 had Brock, even though I did like Brock. S2 had Ellie, and I don't know, she was kind of hit or miss for me. If you look at it a certain way, I guess Theo could be considered a side quest for Season 3, but he's pretty cohesively placed into the main narrative. Lots of shows have one-off characters, and I expected both Theo and the news reporter Ryan just to appear for a few scenes, or maybe even just one, when I first saw them. But I was impressed when they came back later. Good job, you. To happily swing back to being negative, I wish Joe and Love's kid Henry would have gotten something worse than measles. The show says that measles can cause complications, and I assume that's true. But still, measles just doesn't put fear in what's left of my heart. I'm pretty sure they were trying to draw a parallel to COVID, especially since it's brought up a few times in the season, but still. There's also a somewhat goofy Joe on Joe scene during the same episode, and a weirdly written conversation between Matthew, Natalie's husband, and a sick, but kinda recovered, Joe. It jumps from place to place, and they open up to each other somewhat randomly.
What if he doesn't get better? What if they get punished for our sins?
Think it's not punishment. They reflect our sins back at us so clearly it's blinding.
This happened earlier in episode 1 with Love and Natalie, and this conversation, as well as others, made me notice that people get teary-eyed this season if the discussion gets even a little emotional. During part 1 or part 2, a sad or uncomfortable conversation would lead to an actor or actress sometimes having vulnerable eyes to match. This season, it's like teary eyes have been copy and pasted into every surface level conversation. What are you up to, Warner Brothers? You saw what I did to Facebook the other day. What do you think me and my team will do to you? Stop ruining stuff. And if you ruin Dune, it's over for you. I'm from Louisiana, and we're right beside Texas. You know what's in Texas? Walker, Texas Ranger. That's what I thought. I hate to revisit this topic. However, I really hate how Love meleeed Gil, the anti-vaxxer, in her public bakery where anyone could have seen it. She also watches a video of Sherry and Carrie in their cage while in that same public bakery with sound on. And it's not that someone could have walked up on her. It's that someone does walk up on her. But of course, they didn't hear anything, because not only does Joe have to cover for Love, the show has to cover for Love as well. Keep in mind, this is after a very public murder investigation has just ended in their neighborhood. To revisit my revisitation of Gilly Boy, I don't like how his son going to Dartmouth is brought up for the first time, then brought back up only a few minutes later. It's not quite as bad, but it does kinda remind me of Sword Art Online. Thank goodness I'm not making a video on that soon, where I'll have to proofread a at least 20-page script, record that script, and then edit the actual video. I would probably hang myself in a cage. Probable suicide attempts aside, the bit about the attack at the college in the same episode is planted pretty well. However, the thunder and lightning while Joe is dragging Gil's body is once again cartoonish. Matthew talks to the detective during the search for Natalie. They don't find anything, and the detective says, "It's actually good we didn't find anything, because if we did, it could have been some sign that Natalie is no longer alive." Then less than a minute later, they find something. And it's just so awkwardly paced. It's a possibility that they were trying to be darkly funny or trying to make it hit harder since the detective had just said what she said. But I feel like it misses both marks. This next bit is only tangentially related to the show, but I hate how everyone on TV works at a place like Stanford or Princeton. It makes the characters less relatable and makes the showrunners seem out of touch, since I think that they think everyone goes to or teaches at those big name places when most people can't afford it or even get in. Not that I applied to Harvard or anything and didn't get in. Me and the boys got into every school. We just chose not to go. All right? I like the plan Love hatches late in the season to pretend to be interested in Theo, to get him to sneak into his dad's office and see what the dad has on her and Joe. But I'd like it a lot better if it was ambiguous, if she was just playing a part or actually attracted to him and using this as an excuse to be around him. However, they already slept together and it's clear she is attracted to him, so that cat is not only out of the bag, but standing outside Love and Joe's house with a boombox. Theo sees the footage of Joe and Love arguing and Joe punching a wall. He talks to Love about it and openly admits that it's inadmissible in court, but says that they can threaten Joe with the footage. This is such a dumb plan. Joe hitting a wall isn't great, but it's definitely not enough to KO Joe. When I first watched the scene, I thought maybe the angle they were going for was Theo thought that Love thought she was trapped in an abusive marriage because she wanted to stay with her child, and Love could use the footage to get custody of that child. But if it's inadmissible in court, I feel like it probably wouldn't be much use in child custody hearings either. And Theo never even brings this idea up, so I don't know what is going on in Theo's head. One could argue that it's a bad plan on purpose to illustrate that Theo is a dumb, out-of-the-loop teenager in over his head. However, Love doesn't call it a horrible plan. She just ignores it. So I'm not sure if the show thinks it's a good plan or a bad one. Ultimately, this never goes anywhere, and I'm just salty I spent time thinking about it. However, I do like, and I mean really like, when Joe and Love sit down at the kitchen table and finally talk openly and honestly. Joe admits that he cheated, and Love admits that she killed her first husband, but it was an accident. Her mom planting the seed in Joe's mind earlier in the season is great, because that character is sane enough that she might be telling the truth, but also malicious enough to tell a crazy lie to end her daughter's marriage. All this is right after Love's mom has an emotional breakdown and burns down the vineyard, so Joe is given the perfect piece of information by the perfect person at the perfect time, and it is, I think, a perfect reveal. And I love them recontextualizing Love's backstory. However, I do have a bit of a rewrite. I think it would have also been good if things were going kind of well between Joe and Love, and this piece of information either turned Joe against Love or set him down the path towards turning against Love. Eventually, Joe still kills Love like he does now, but in a different context where he is the aggressor and not acting in self-defense. Joe tells her that he's sorry, but he doesn't want to end up like James, and tells her that's the reason why he's got to do this. Then Love tells him that she didn't kill James. Her mom was just lying. Joe initially doesn't believe her. Then Love presents him with proof, and Joe has to face the fact that he killed Love over a lie. Joe apologizes profusely to her while she slowly dies. The show has already created a unique situation where it's totally believable that Love killed her first husband, so I think it can make for a solid and reasonable twist. In the actual show, Joe gets got by Love because although he is smart enough not to eat the food He never considers that the silverware itself has poison on it. And I like that because it's a believable oversight that a smart person could make. And just in general, I really like when shows or movies or books have one character outsmart a second character without turning the other person into an idiot. And you accomplish that. We're going to take a little detour here and go over some scattered nitpicks, then end with talking about the very end of the season. Joe has trouble getting his little soldier up at the beginning of this season. And I hate that Love discussed this with Sherry, of all people. It just feels like such a Beck move. And I hate that they partially Beckified Love. At a different point, Theo tells Love that he's flunking out of school because of her, which is, number one, a lot to put on someone, and number two, a terrible thing to tell a love interest. And after he tells her this, they sleep together. Because apparently in the world of the show, you just need to tell a lady that you're emotionally unstable and incapable of functioning without her, and the girl will love you for it. Love's mom calls her out on this and says Love loves the idea of fixing someone. And I'm glad the show is self-aware, but it's still annoying, and self-awareness only goes so far. I alluded to it earlier, but Theo also plays music outside Love's house, and Love responds by giving in and talking to him. For a show trying to be progressive, some teenagers could definitely watch this series and get the wrong idea on how to spit game. Moving on, I love Joe's little shots at Peach in this season and season 2. Apparently that chick is so annoying, Joe can't help but continue to trash talk her. And honestly, same. I hate that woman. Also worth mentioning that Love's narration in episode 6 is really good. It's like the good version of what they try to do with Beck in season 1. And her putting this brain-dead motivational speaker in her place is so satisfying.
I would suggest to look inward and read my book.
So I can read more about your narcissistic climb to success when, poof, you suddenly discovered you were deserving? Sounds like a bunch of privilege bullshit to me.
On top of that, 40 is back. I was honestly kind of worried that they would memify him when he popped up, especially since he already does act sort of meme-ish sometimes. But thankfully, his dialogue is in line with his season 2 character. Although he does talk slower now. It could be the actor, or it could be because 40 is sober in the afterlife. But I don't think this show is that deep or cares about dialogue that much. Because Flashback Joe's lines still don't sound like a little kid. Adult Joe and Library Girl spend some time together, and I love how she says if Ryan, her ex, finds out that she was with a married man, no matter how innocently, he will try to use it against her. And it leads me to ask a philosophical question. How do you innocently have an affair? And I know, she could just mean that her and Joe shouldn't be seen, even benignly, hanging out in public together, because Joe is taken. But my interpretation of the line is funnier. So me and my team are going to go with that. Joe doses Ryan, who is a recovered addict, to get him to fall off the wagon. However, he doesn't fall. Then Joe learns he's been tricked. And Lady Marianne's ex never stopped using drugs at all. And I like that. Protagonists need to lose sometimes. Additionally, Joe tries to follow Ryan later on, then Big R gets the drop on him. Ryan lets Joe up, then Joe pushes him off a ledge, and Ryan still doesn't die. I honestly thought out of everything, random guy Ryan might be the reason Joe Goldberg gets caught, and I kind of love the idea of him getting owned by just some random guy. But unfortunately, Joe goes down there and stabs him and easily makes it away. Then it's conveniently blamed on a mugger because there's been a string of muggings in the area, which I could be wrong, but I don't think we've ever heard about that until now. Even if we did hear about it, it'd be much more believable if one of our main characters got mugged in like episode 1 or something. And my vote would be Sherry Carey. Because I love the idea of Sherry getting robbed while trying to condescendingly trash talk the mugger about his life choices. And the mugger is like, I'm robbing you. I don't care what you think. Then Carrie tries to square up and gets owned. Returning to the real show, I like when Sherry reveals that her and her husband are into Joe and love, because while not being a huge reveal, it is perfectly in line with how they've both been acting this whole time. Moving on, I hate to say it, but this season diminished my view of Joe a bit. I think television has conditioned me to be okay with a quote-unquote good guy murdering people. However, Joe manipulating Love, a woman who loves him, to try to get her to divorce him leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I know he's doing it because he thinks she killed her first husband, which she did, but at the same time, Love is genuinely trying to make it work, so I don't know. My feelings are all confused. Next, I'd like to go back to what I talked about earlier, which is wanting more ambiguity in the Theo and Love situation. It's not a perfect example of what I mentioned, because I'd like something more drawn out, but I enjoyed the role-playing scene with the football in episode 8, where you're not quite sure exactly what's happening or how far it'll go. However, I don't like that Love and Joe talked about it beforehand. I think it'd be better if the audience found out that Joe was watching them at the same time Theo does. Then Love and Joe can passionately discuss it if they want. Moving on, I love the tension of the sex party that neither of our leads really want. But just like with my previous complaint, Joe daydreams about sleeping with Library Girl while banging Cher Bear. And I wish both scenes were more dreamlike, so it's unclear what's real and what's fantasy. As it is, it's clear that he didn't actually leave the party to be with Book Girl, because she was at her house while on the phone with him earlier and asked him to come to her house. So why would they meet at the library now? It definitely fits for a fantasy, but not for reality. And also, I think if they did do it in a more dreamlike way, Love yelling and running out of the room like she already does would be the perfect thing to pull Joe out of it and show which reality is reality. Kind of felt like Morpheus saying that sentence out loud. Joe Goldberg, will you take the red pill and become based, or the blue pill and become French? I really should not have eaten a whole box of hot tamales before writing this, but I'm leaving it in. The fight right after the sex part is cool though. Joe gets his butt kicked, which makes sense when he's going against Wilderness Man. Them shooting arrows at each other does seem like a bit much though. Later, Theo, a teenager, telling Love, a grown woman, he can take care of her, is cringe. I know that's an overused term, but it's the only way to describe it. On the other hand, Love giving Sherry and Carrie a gun and saying, LOL, one of you should shoot the other, is pretty funny. And it's made even better by the fact that Carrie accidentally ricochets a bullet and takes part of Sherry's ear off. After that, Love suggested her and Joe start a new chapter by having a new baby. Then Joe, in narration, says, I'm speechless, but I think it'd be better if he just silently stared at her rather than using his speech to tell us how speechless he is. This is a personal thing, but I just kind of hate the phrases I'm speechless and needless to say in general. And I fully hate I could care less, because that means you do care, and I feel like I'm taking crazy pills with that one, because everyone around here says that, instead of saying I couldn't care less. I gotta move on, because stupid phrases could be a whole video. Circling back to the finale, Love ties Joe up in the kitchen, and it would be implausible to try to put him in the cage, but I do wish she had put him at least in the basement, just so Sherry and Carrie could try to talk to him and probably say some wild stuff. I know I complained earlier about their dialogue screwing with the tone, and it does, but I still kind of enjoy it. On the other hand, if Joe was in the basement, it would be harder for Matthew to find him and then leave him there, which I think is a pretty cool moment. I thought he was going to be a stereotypical good guy and save Joe, but I'm kind of glad they went a different way with it, and I love Matthew's complete shift in attitude when Joe tells Matthew not to call the cops, and it dawns on him that Joe isn't a victim, or at least isn't only a victim. Love invites Big M over and tells her that Joe killed her ex Ryan while slowly, creepily, and suspiciously approaching her with one hand behind her back. Marion's daughter pokes her head in at an extremely convenient time and says she needs to use the bathroom. Love offers their bathroom, and Bookstore Girl is like, sure, that sounds safe. Come on in, sweetie. I mean, how oblivious can you be? And it's made worse by the fact that in pretty much every other scene, she's shown to be pretty astute. Love lets Marion go, then pulls a Beck and says to Mr. Goldberg, the insanity you drive me to, Joe. Putting the fact that she almost murdered another person on Joe, like he put a gun to her head and made her do it. Then, of course, one of the biggest moments in the series so far, if not the biggest moment, Joe kills Love. Look, I'm glad we didn't lose Joe, but Love dying is so sad. It's probably one of the saddest moments I've ever seen, and it made me feel really lonely afterwards. I mean, they had so many good moments in season 2, like Love making him muffins, trying to make him better, crying in front of him, and just thinking about the somewhat dysfunctional but happy life Joe, 40, and Love could have had. It just hurts, man. It just hurts. And it makes this whole thing hurt so much more that from episode 1, the writing in season 3 makes that theoretical, kumbaya style life completely impossible. It's like the show went out of its way to make Love seem more like an unhinged villain, someone Joe had to kill. And by the end, Joe did need to kill her, just to stay alive. But fortunately, Or, unfortunately, you can't just wipe season 2 love from my memory and take away the magical promise that relationship had at one point. Now, you could say that the relationship was always doomed, but I don't think that many things in life are inevitable. The future is changeable, and that's both uplifting and horrifying, since you can easily change it for the worse by accident. But all that being said, I think they had a chance. Her death just hit me so hard and sucked the life right out of me. And regardless of my problems with the rest of the season, I think the ending is a 10 out of 10. And I know this is weird for me to say after all the problems I listed, but I did like watching this season. Whether or not it's objectively good is a different story. In any case, those are my thoughts on You. I did binge watch the entirety of season 3 in a 24-hour period, so let me know if I got anything wrong, and I'll see you on the next one.
I want a life with you. Do you want that too?
Yes. More than anything.
Okay. Whatever you're running from, we can figure it out together.